Hey there, welcome to the week one reading summary presentation. My name is Ariel Driggers, and we're going to get started with the introduction. So, we started off this week discussing social psychology in a general sense. And Kaysen, Finn, and Marcus defined social psychology as the scientific study of how individuals think, feel, and behave in a social context. So, social psychology deals with a wide range of effects on human behavior, why humans do what they do, and why they react the way they react. A very important aspect of social psychology is the emphasis on the individual. Kaysen also talks about how other social sciences tend to focus on group factors, why groups do what they do, or how somebody reacts with a group. Things like that, whereas social psychology focuses on the psychology of the individual. So it's more of why did John Doe react that way given the environment he was in? What made him react in that way? And some other phenomena that we discussed this week have to do with that, and that would be behavioral obedience, human aggression, and interdependence. So just a brief little overview of those three. So behavioral obedience, it really discusses and it is focused on why humans obey, who they choose to obey, and why they make that choice. And we'll get into that a little bit more, and the positive and negatives, because there's definitely positive and negatives to that obedience. So we'll discuss that in greater detail here shortly. The other one was human aggression, and human aggression is something that happens commonly, and I think we see a rise in that in certain cases, in certain situations. And so that's basically, how somebody reacts in a violent manner in order to harm somebody. And it might not even be played out in a harmful situation. A lot of times we can see that human aggression is kind of done as a threat mechanism, so yelling, something like that, to definitely just show that you are alpha, or whatever it is. So we'll discuss that a little bit more as well. And then the last one is interdependence. And interdependence, it's basically a relational topic. So it's talking about how we do things with the mindset of others. We keep others in mind. So, like a husband and wife, when they make decisions, they typically, not all cases, but try to make that decision with the other individual in mind. Excuse me. So those are our three main topics this week. So let's go ahead and get started with behavioral obedience. Milgram describes behavioral obedience as the basic structure of social life. So it's really, we have this hierarchy even today in society. We have laws and rules, and we as humans obey and choose to obey constantly. And there are positive and negative factors with this. So a positive factor of behavioral obedience is definitely, obeying based on, the laws and how society can continue running in a peaceful manner. But the negative side to that is choosing to obey someone who is asking you to not obey the laws. So there's an obedience there to someone, but it's not necessarily to society's laws and Porter. And so Pazzi says that social psychology has for many years shown a strong interest in the dynamics between individuals and their authorities, with particular emphasis on the behavior of obeying the commands of unjust authority. And that really speaks to that negative portion, I believe, where people are choosing to obey an authority that's not necessarily an authority that they should. And so behavioral obedience is really looking at that. And we can see that with those definitions, behavioral obedience kind of speaks to interdependence. They kind of go hand in hand in some aspects. And we're going to talk about interdependence here shortly, but we're going to go ahead and move on to human aggression. So human aggression, when viewed and defined, can be looked at as an act of violence or violent behavior directed towards someone in an effort to inflict harm. As I stated earlier, sometimes that harm can be mental, so like a yelling or an aggressive manner. And other times that aggression can lead to, actually harming someone physically. Either way, not a great thing. I've looked at a study where they were viewing road rage, which is a form of a human aggression that I see most commonly, and I thought that it was a good study to look at in relation to our topics this week. And the study looks at the type of aggression specifically in Toronto, as it's said to be the scene for several high-profile road rage incidents. And I think that, just the more traffic that is, presented there, and people they get angry very quickly on the road. And so aggression can be, anywhere and everywhere. But, with our ability to, drive and get out and go, I think road rage is definitely one of the higher forms of human aggression. Even in Milgram's study, he stated that his subjects were frequently highly agitated and even angered. So we see that human aggression, can play a part in that obedience, and even in interdependence, as we act on our aggression or how we obey is definitely it can play a part. It could be a form of why for the obedient behavior. So if you're the person that you are, choosing to obey is angry, and they want you to act in an angry manner, and you choose to obey that, that's definitely, a part of human aggression and how human aggression and behavioral obedience come together. Now, interdependence is next up, and we're going to talk about it and how it relates to these two things as well. So interdependence is defined by Masher as a mutual influence of two individuals' thoughts, emotions, and behaviors as an innate feature of close relationships. So interdependence is the relational aspect of life, as I was talking about in previous slides. And it definitely does go with behavioral obedience. They relate to each other. Our choosing to obey can be because of a relationship. So if, a mother and a child, the child chooses to obey the mother because they want to make them happy, or they want to make their life less complicated, so they choose to do, a chore. That is a part of interdependence, but it also speaks to the behavioral obedience portion of it. Rumble states that interdependence theory proposes to make many everyday interactions In order to understand how individuals make choices and how both personal and social factors influence these choices and situations. So, interdependence is really looking at that relational piece and why we as humans choose to obey and choose to act in the way that we act, and so that is what that is speaking to. So to conclude this week one reading summary presentation, we this week really looked at social psychology in a general sense and its definition, and then we spoke about behavioral obedience, human aggression, and interdependence, and how these things tie into each other. So just as a review point, social psychology defined is the scientific study of how individuals feel, think, and behave in social context. And going off of that, we talked specifically about behavioral obedience and why humans obey and who they obey and what the reason is for obeying. We talked about human aggression and how humans react and act in violence and why they do that and what their reasoning is for that. And then we also looked at interdependence and how people choose to act and make choices based on relationships, and that's that relational aspect of social psychology. So in a little bit more specific way, we talked about how they tie to each other, how obedience can be a result of interdependence, and how aggression can be a negative action of obedience. Social psychology studies these three things in order to better understand why we do what we do. And to move a little bit further, there are two questions that I have that I want to pose to you. The first one is, what implications occur when one considers interdependence in their Christian walk? And then the second is, how does interdependence affect group think? So we've talked about these things. We've read articles on these things, and even in our text, we've talked about interdependence, and we talked about groupthink and those types of things. So, my questions really are going back to what we've read, and I'd like to see what you would have to say about interdependence in relation to our Christian walk, and then also interdependence and its effect on groupthink. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.